everyone, my name is Niyanti and I'm a tutor here on Chegg Tutors. Welcome to this video. I mostly tutor biology and medicine related subjects, and today we're going to learn a little bit about the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells and the basic organelles within these cells. So let's take a look at the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, as you can see on this table. So the word pro means before, and the word karyote means like a nut or a kernel. So the prokaryotic cell is the more premature, earlier version of the cell, and the eukaryote, U meaning true, is the more advanced version of a cell, as sort of a simple way to put it. So prokaryotic organisms are, for example, bacteria, the simpler organisms that are less developed, and the eukaryotic organisms are plants and animals and humans, and the more complex, larger organisms that we see. So the main difference between a prokaryotic and a eukaryotic cell is the fact that a prokaryotic cell does not have a membrane-bound nucleus or membrane-bound organelles, whereas a eukaryotic cell does. So this kind of means that you can imagine a eukaryotic cell as a house or an apartment with different rooms in it that are separated by walls, and kind of in the same way as we have different functions for each room, where you cook in the kitchen, and your bedroom is for leisure and rest, and the bathroom is for your bathroom stuff. So every room has a separate function, and it's divided by walls. But a prokaryotic cell is just one large area without separate organelles that have no membranes. So it's kind of like a one-room studio apartment where you just do everything in that one room. So that's kind of the main difference between a prokaryotic and a eukaryotic cell. Other differences include the fact that prokaryotic cells are much smaller and simpler in size. Eukaryotic cells are more larger and more complex. Prokaryotes generally have circular DNA, but eukaryotes, they have multiple strands of DNA that are all sort of smashed into this tiny nucleus that's in the center of the cell. And as you can see here, the eukaryotic cell also has a number of other membrane-bound organelles, as the mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus, and the ribosomes, and lots of different other organelles that perform different functions within the eukaryotic cell. So for example, of a prokaryotic cell is bacteria and archaea, and examples of eukaryotic cells, like I mentioned, are all plants, animals, and fungi. And these four characteristics, the cell membrane, the DNA, the cytoplasm, and the ribosomes, are kind of what the prokaryotic cells and the eukaryotic cells have in common. So that's why I put that in the middle here. So let's take a look at each of these. So this is a picture of sort of the general cell components. As you can see, the DNA is the genetic material of the cell, which is replicated when the cell divides. The cell membrane is the outer covering that separates the contents within the cell from the environment outside the cell. The ribosome is where protein synthesis takes place, and cytoplasm is a jelly-like substance within the cell. It is everything that extends from the nucleus to the cell membrane, and this other cell organelles are suspended within it. It's like a jelly-like substance that's made up of what's called cytosol. That is the fluid that makes up cytoplasm. So specifically for prokaryotic cells, I've drawn that they have the DNA is in the form of a nucleoid, which is the genetic material inside a cell. There's no, unlike the eukaryotic cell, which has a separate nucleus that is membrane bound, which contains and protects the genetic material, the prokaryotic cells, as you can see in this case, just have the DNA in the cytoplasm, which is not membrane bound, and it's kind of in a circular kind of a ball called a nucleoid. And in a eukaryotic cell, as you can see, it's more complex. It contains a number of different organisms here. It has the cytoplasm. This is ribosome. You can see that there's a nucleus with a nucleolus within it. And as you can see here, the various parts of this eukaryotic cell have been labeled. So now let's go ahead and talk about the functions of some of these organelles. So first off, you have the plasma membrane, which is basically what separates the cell from its surroundings. It is a border between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell, and it's made up of a double layer of phospholipids. And it controls the passage of various molecules into and outside the cell. So that's kind of like a security guard that kind of decides what gets into the cell and what stays outside the cell. And depending on the size and the polarity of the molecule, that is going to determine whether it's going to be able to enter the cell or not. Smaller non-polar molecules are able to enter the cell directly through the phospholipid layer, but larger polar molecules often need to enter the cell through specialized channels, for example. Also, the surface area is what limits the exchange of material across the cell membrane. So, for example, in the intestines, the cells have long finger-like projections that are like, they look kind of like this. I'm just going to draw it for you here on the side. They're finger-like projections which help to increase the surface area of the cell, and that's what helps to absorb more nutrients from the food in the intestines. So that's what it means by surface area is going to limit or determine the exchange of materials happening across the cell membrane. Next we have the cytosol, which, like I said, is a very watery material. It makes up the cytoplasm, and it contains proteins, smaller organic molecules like glucose, polysaccharides, amino acids, nucleic acids, fatty acids, and this is also what contains the floating membrane-bound organelles within a eukaryotic cell. Prokaryotic cells also have cytosol, but they don't have the membrane-bound organelles within it. And next you have the nucleus, which is basically the house of the genetic information in the cell, the DNA, and it's also where ribosomes are made. Ribosomes are the protein synthesizing machinery of a cell. As you can see here, the nucleus is bordered by the nuclear envelope, which has an inner membrane and an outer membrane. And within the nucleus, you have a nucleolus, which is where the ribosomal RNA is synthesized. And the DNA is packaged in the form of chromosomes within the nucleus. And the DNA is never going to leave the nucleus. Instead, it is transcribed into mRNA, which can leave the nucleus and then which is translated into proteins by the ribosomes. Then you have the mitochondrion, which is a singular form of mitochondria. The mitochondrion is the energy, the powerhouse of the cell, as it is popularly known. This is the place where ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is synthesized. This is the main energy carrying molecule of the body, and the oxygen requiring step in order to synthesize ATP, it happens in the mitochondria. And the mitochondria contains an outer mitochondrial membrane, an inner mitochondrial membrane, and an intermembrane space. It also inside it contains a mitochondrial matrix, and this undulating membrane here forms the cristae of the mitochondria. So this is where the cellular respiration takes place, and the number of mitochondria depends on the role and the energy required by the cells. So muscle cells, for example, require a lot of oxygen, lots of energy, so they contain larger numbers of mitochondria, whereas other cells, like the red blood cells in the humans, do not have mitochondria at all. And then a couple of more of the organelles are the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, and the lysosomes. So the reason I've clumped these together is because they all form what's known as an endomembrane system. So the main function of the endoplasmic reticulum is protein modification, lipid synthesis, and there's two types, rough and smooth. And the difference is that the rough ones contain ribosomes on the cytosolic end of the endoplasmic reticulum. As you can see in this picture, the endoplasmic reticulum is kind of budding off from the inner membrane of the nucleus. So that's why it's called as the endomembrane system, where sort of the membranes of the different organelles kind of branch off into vesicles or other structures, because their function is all integrated with each other, depends on each other. So that's what it means by endomembrane system. Golgi apparatus is also a similar organism. The function of it is protein modification, tagging, and sorting. So basically what the Golgi apparatus does is it kind of puts addresses on the various protein vesicles and tells them where they're supposed to go. For example, you have certain proteins like the lysosomal enzymes. They're supposed to go to the lysosome and form a lysozyme. Then you have certain other proteins that are supposed to be sent to the cell membrane, and so on and so forth. So the Golgi apparatus is what kind of puts the address on the protein vesicles and tells them where they're supposed to be transported. So that's what the Golgi apparatus does. And lastly, you have the lysosomes, which are basically the recycling bin for the cell. So where all the old and breakdown products of proteins are degraded, and they are recycled, and they are turned into components that can be reused by the cell. And this is called as autophagy. So how lysosomes are formed is basically where you have an endosome, which combines with the lysosomal enzymes from the Golgi apparatus to form a lysosome. So that's a little bit about the endomembrane system. And so these are kind of the main few organelles of the cell. You have the nucleus, the mitochondria, the cytoplasm, the cell membrane, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, and lysosomes. And let's just recap a little bit here about the differences between the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells do not contain membrane-bound organelles, but eukaryotic cells do. Prokaryotic cells are smaller and simpler. Eukaryotic cells are larger and more complex. The DNA is circular in prokaryotic. It is multiple strands, single strands of DNA in the form of a nucleus in the eukaryote, and the common structures like the cell membrane, the DNA, cytoplasm, and ribosomes, which are common to both types of cells. So I hope that this video kind of gave you a nice overview of the difference between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells and the basic function of the organelles within these types. If you have any more questions, my link to my Chegg Tutor profile is down below. Feel free to send me a message on there. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you, and have a good rest of the day. Bye.